10,000 years ago, the sky turned black with ships. The Velthari came from beyond the stars, and they came hungry. Humanity was nothing then. Small tribes scattered across a green world, armed with spears and fire and prayers to gods who did not answer. The Velthari did not see people. They saw resources. They saw cattle. The conquest was quick and brutal. Millions were taken in chains, loaded onto ships, and never seen again. The Velthari stripped Earth of gold, of rare metals, of anything they found valuable. They burned forests for sport. They laughed at the humans who tried to fight back with sticks and stones. When they finished, they looked at what remained and decided it was not worth keeping. The planet was too small, the creatures too weak. They marked Earth in their records as ceded territory and left. One day, they would return. The livestock would multiply, and there would be more to harvest. Then they forgot about the small blue world. But the small blue world never forgot them. The stories survived. Parents told children about the sky demons who came in the night. Cave paintings showed the great ships. Songs were sung about the ones who were taken. Generation after generation, the memory passed down like a sacred fire that could never be allowed to die. And with the memory came a promise. Never again. Never again would humanity kneel. 10,000 years is a long time. Humanity grew. They built cities, then nations, then empires of their own. They discovered fire was not magic but science. They learned to fly. They reached for the stars that had once brought their tormentors. By the year 2347, humans had spread across their solar system. Cities floated in the clouds of Venus. Miners dug deep into the moons of Jupiter. 1 billion people lived on Mars, and Earth, the old mother world, had become the heart of something the Velthari would not recognize. The United Earth Defense Council met in Seoul, in a building that had once been a palace. Commander Park Do-hyun stood at the center of the war room, surrounded by screens showing every ship, every station, every weapon humanity possessed. He was 63 years old, with gray hair and a face marked by decades of service. He had fought in the Martian border conflicts, had lost friends in the asteroid skirmishes, had seen humanity at its worst and its best. He thought he had seen everything. Then the alarms began to scream. Lieutenant Kim Yuna was the first to speak. She was young, barely 30, but brilliant with data systems. Her fingers flew across the controls as she pulled up the orbital feeds. Her face went pale. "Commander," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "We have contacts. Thousands of contacts. They just appeared out of nowhere." The main screen flickered, and then they all saw it. Ships. More ships than anyone had ever seen. They filled the space above Earth like a swarm of locusts, blocking out the stars. Each one was massive, covered in strange symbols, built in a design that humanity had only seen in ancient drawings. The Velthari had returned. For a long moment, no one in the war room moved. No one breathed. The old stories were true. The nightmare was real. Then a transmission came through. The alien language was harsh and clicking, but the translation software worked quickly. A face appeared on screen, gray-skinned and sharp-featured, with eyes that held nothing but contempt. "I am Admiral Tovan of the Velthari Third Fleet," the alien said. "Creatures of Earth, your waiting is over. The Empire has returned to collect what is ours. You will surrender. You will resume your positions as servants. You have one rotation of your planet to comply. Resistance is not possible. You are cattle. You have always been cattle." The transmission ended. The war room erupted. Generals shouted. Admirals demanded orders. Politicians screamed about diplomacy. Everyone talked, and no one listened. Do-hyun raised his hand, and slowly, the room fell silent. He walked to the main console and opened a channel. His voice would be broadcast to every ship, every station, every home on Earth, and across the solar system. Billions would hear what he said next. He looked at the alien fleet on the screen. He thought about his grandmother, who had told him the old stories when he was a boy. She had made him promise to remember. She had made him promise to be ready. "This is Fleet Commander Park Do-yoon of the United Earth Defense Council," he said. "I speak for humanity. All of humanity." He paused. 10,000 years ago, you came to our world. You killed our people. You took our families. You called us cattle and left us to suffer. You thought we would forget. You thought we would stay weak. You thought wrong. His voice grew harder. We remembered every death. We remembered every chain. We built monuments to our suffering so that no generation would ever forget what you did to us. And while you were gone, while you sat in your empire and counted your slaves, we were getting stronger. We were getting smarter. We were getting ready. He stepped closer to the screen, as if he could look directly into Admiral Toven's eyes. You want us to kneel? We will not kneel. You want us to serve? We will not serve. You want war? Then you will have war. But understand this, Admiral. We are not the frightened tribes you conquered 10,000 years ago. We are humanity. And humanity does not bow. He cut the transmission. The war room was silent. Una stared at him with wide eyes. The general stood frozen. Then, from somewhere in the back, a young officer began to clap. Another joined. Then another. Soon the entire room was cheering. Fists raised. Voices shouting words that had been passed down for 10,000 years. Never again. Never again. Never again. Far above Earth, Admiral Toven watched the human transmission with confusion. His probe showed cities where there should have been villages, weapons where there should have been sticks, defiance where there should have been fear. This was not what the record said. This was not what was supposed to happen. For the first time in his long career, Admiral Toven felt something he did not recognize. It took him a moment to understand what it was. It was doubt, but he pushed it away. They were still cattle. They had to be. No matter what they said, no matter what they built, they were still the same weak creatures his ancestors had conquered. This would be a quick mission. A simple collection. He gave the order to prepare for attack. He did not know that he had just made the worst mistake of his life. Admiral Toven was not a patient creature. He had conquered 12 worlds in his career and had never waited more than a day for surrender. But the human commander's defiance had surprised him, and his advisors suggested caution. They did not understand these creatures. Perhaps a meeting would reveal their weaknesses. He sent a message requesting diplomatic contact. He expected groveling. He expected fear. He expected the humans to finally realize their situation and beg for mercy. Instead, he received a calm acceptance. The humans would meet. They would send their ambassador. The neutral zone was established in empty space between the two fleets. Toven brought his finest warship, surrounded by 50 escort vessels. He wanted the humans to see his power. He wanted them to understand that diplomacy was merely a delay of the inevitable. Then the human ship arrived. The Hansen was not large by Valkyrie standards, but it moved with a grace that made Toven uncomfortable. It cut through space like a blade, smooth and precise, flanked by 6 smaller ships that seemed to dance around it. The Valkyrie sensors tried to analyze the human vessels and returned confused readings. The technology was different, strange, advanced in ways that should not have been possible. Ambassador Choi Suni boarded the Valkyrie flagship alone. She was a small woman, barely reaching Toven's chest, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a simple style. She wore a dark uniform with no decorations except a single pin shaped like Earth. She did not bow. She did not tremble. She walked into the meeting chamber as if she owned it. Toven sat on his throne, surrounded by his guards and advisors. He looked down at the human with the same expression he used when examining livestock. "You speak for your species?" he asked. "I do," Suni replied. Her voice was calm and clear. Toven noticed something strange. She was speaking his language, not through a translator, but actually speaking it with an accent that sounded almost ancient. The words she used were old, formal, from a dialect that had not been common for thousands of years. "How do you know our tongue?" he demanded. Suni smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "You left things behind when you visited our world," she said. "Crashed scouts. Abandoned equipment. Dead soldiers. We found them. We studied them. We learned your language from recordings, from writings, from the memories of those you tortured. We have been studying you for 10,000 years, Admiral. We know you better than you know yourselves. We know you better than you know yourselves." Toven shifted on his throne. This was not how cattle spoke. He raised his hand, and a screen appeared in the air. It showed images from the original conquest of Earth. Humans in chains, kneeling in the dirt. Humans crying as their families were taken. Humans broken and beaten and helpless. "This is what you are," Toven said. "This is what you have always been. Animals, resources. You exist to serve the Empire. Your defiance is amusing, but it changes nothing." He expected shame. He expected the human to lower her eyes and accept the truth. Instead, Suni's smile grew colder. "We remember those images," she said. "We have copies of them too. We show them to our children. We display them in our schools. We built great monuments so that no human would ever forget what your kind did to us." She stepped forward. The guards raised their weapons, but she ignored them. "You think those images show our weakness, Admiral? You are wrong. They show our beginning. They show the fire that is burned in our hearts for 10,000 years. Every chain you put on us, we remembered. Every death we honored. Every tear we saved." Her voice hardened. "And we used that pain. We used it to build, to grow, to prepare. While you sat in your empire, fat and lazy and certain of your superiority, we were working. Every generation worked harder than the last. Every scientist to search for better weapons. Every soldier trained for the war we knew would come." She pulled a small device from her pocket. The guards tensed, but she simply pressed a button. A hologram appeared between them, showing a map of the solar system. Human ships were marked in blue, positioned throughout the system in a web of defensive lines. 342 warships, Suni said. 47 orbital defense platforms. 16 planetary shield generators. 200,000 armed soldiers. And weapons, Admiral. Weapons you cannot imagine. Weapons we built by studying everything you left behind and then improving it 1,000 times over. Toven stared at the display. His intelligence reports had said the humans had perhaps 50 ships at most. Primitive vessels. Easy targets. The reports were wrong. "You are bluffing," he said, but his voice was less certain now. "Am I?" Suni asked. "Then attack. Send your fleet against us. We will show you how far cattle can climb when given 10,000 years of motivation." She deactivated the hologram and looked directly into Toven's eyes. "Here are our terms, Admiral. You will leave this system. You will never return. You will release all records of Earth from your archives and forget our world exists. If you do this, we will allow you to leave in peace." Toven stood, his face twisted with rage. "You dare give terms to me? To the Velthari Empire? We have conquered 1,000 worlds. We have ruled this galaxy for 100,000 years. You are nothing. We were nothing, Suni corrected. Now we are something else. Something you should fear. She turned and walked toward the door. Wait, Tovan commanded. You cannot simply leave. We are not finished. Suni paused at the door and looked back. We are finished, Admiral. You have heard our terms. You have 1 day to accept them. After that, we will assume you have chosen war. She walked out. Tovan stood in the empty chamber, surrounded by his guards, and tried to understand what had just happened. He had come to accept a surrender. Instead, he had been threatened by a creature whose ancestors he could have crushed under his foot. His advisors whispered that perhaps they should reconsider. Perhaps they should study these humans more before attacking. Perhaps the situation was not as simple as they had thought. Tovan silenced them with a wave of his hand. They are cattle, he said. Clever cattle who have learned some tricks. But cattle nonetheless. We have 3,000 ships. They have 300. The math is simple. He gave the order to prepare for attack. Back on the Hanson, Suni entered the command center where her officers waited. Captain Shin Minho was the first to speak. Did they accept? He asked, already knowing the answer. Suni shook her head. They will attack. They cannot imagine losing. It is not in their nature. She sat in her chair and looked at the distant Velthari fleet on the screen. Then we will have to teach them, she said softly. We will have to teach them what humanity has become. The officers nodded. They had prepared for this their entire lives. Their parents had prepared. Their grandparents had prepared. For 10,000 years, humanity had waited for this moment. Now it had arrived. The attack came at dawn, Earth time. Not because it mattered in space, but because Admiral Tovan wanted symbolism. He wanted the humans to wake to their destruction. He wanted the sun rising over their world to be the last beautiful thing they ever saw. 3,000 Velthari warships moved toward Earth in perfect formation. They were massive things, each one covered in weapons that had destroyed civilizations. Their shields glowed with power. Their engines burned bright against the darkness of space. They looked like gods of war coming to judge the unworthy. The human fleet waited. Commander Park Do-hyun stood on the bridge of the command station Gwanggaeto, watching the enemy approach on his screens. Around him, officers worked in tense silence. Every ship in the fleet was connected to his command. Every captain waited for his word. Distance? He asked. 400,000 kilometers and closing. Lieutenant Kim Yuna reported. They are not slowing down. Do-hyun nodded. The Velthari were confident. They expected to simply roll over the human defenses like a wave crushing sand. They had done it 100 times before on 100 worlds. All ships, Do-hyun said into the fleet channel. Hold position. Do not fire until they enter the zone. The zone was a carefully calculated sphere of space around Earth. Human weapons had been tested and retested. They knew exactly how far they could reach, exactly how much damage they could do. The Velthari did not know this. They thought they understood human technology from their old records. They were about to learn how wrong they were. On the destroyer Ulsan, Captain Shin Minho watched his screens with steady eyes. His ship was on the front line, one of 50 destroyers forming the first wave of defense. His crew was young, most of them born after the decision to prepare for this war had been made. They had trained their entire lives for this moment. Captain, his weapons officer said. Enemy entering optimal range in 60 seconds. Minho touched the photograph attached to his console. It showed his grandfather, a historian who had spent his life studying the Velthari. The old man had died 3 years ago, but his last words to Minho still echoed in his memory. Make them remember us, the old man had said. Make them regret ever coming to our world. 30 seconds, the weapons officer announced. The Valkyrie fleet came closer. Their formation was impressive, but rigid, unchanging. They flew the same patterns their ancestors had used for 100,000 years. Why change what always worked? 10 seconds. Dahyun's voice came over the fleet channel. All ships, fire at will. The darkness of space turned to light. Human railguns fired projectiles at speeds the Valkyrie had never encountered. Tiny pieces of metal, accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light, tore through Valkyrie shields like paper. Directed energy weapons, developed from stolen Valkyrie technology and improved beyond recognition, cut through hulls with surgical precision. But the most devastating weapons were the smallest. Drone swarms erupted from human carriers. Millions of tiny machines, each one controlled by advanced artificial intelligence, flooded toward the enemy fleet. They were too small to target, too fast to avoid, too many to stop. They found weak points in Valkyrie armor and exploded. They jammed sensors and blinded weapons. They turned the space around the Valkyrie ships into a storm of destruction. The first wave of Valkyrie ships died in 14 minutes. Admiral Toven watched in shock. 300 ships destroyed. Not damaged, destroyed. Torn apart by weapons his sensors could barely detect. By tactics his computers could not predict. Impossible, he whispered. This is impossible. His advisors screamed for orders. His captains demanded guidance. But Toven could only stare at the screens as more of his ships exploded. The humans were not fighting like any enemy he had ever faced. They did not form lines. They did not follow patterns. They moved like water, flowing around his formations, striking from angles that should not have been possible. On the Ulsan, Captain Minho led his destroyer group through the chaos. His ship danced through enemy fire, its I-pilot making adjustments faster than any living creature could. Every shot from his railguns found a target. Every torpedo struck true. Third enemy cruiser down, his weapons officer shouted. Fourth is venting atmosphere. Minho allowed himself a small smile. The stories had been true. The Valkyrie were not gods. They were not invincible. They were simply creatures who had never faced a real challenge. Now they faced humanity. But the battle was not one-sided. The Valkyrie had numbers, and numbers mattered. Human ships died too. The destroyer Incheon took a direct hit and exploded with all hands. The cruiser Bizem lost its engines and drifted helpless before Valkyrie guns finished it. Good soldiers, good people, died in fire and vacuum. On the Gwanggaedo, Do-hyun watched the casualty reports scroll across his screen. Each name was a person he had failed. Each death was a weight on his soul. But he could not afford to mourn. Not yet. Fleet status, he demanded. We have lost 47 ships, Yuna reported. The enemy has lost over 800. Their formation is breaking. It was working. The plan was working. Then Toven finally found his courage. He ordered a full assault, every remaining ship charging toward Earth at maximum speed. It was desperate, reckless, but it was his only chance. If he could break through the human lines, if he could reach Earth itself, he could still win. They are pushing through, Yuna said, her voice tight. All ships are engaging, but there are too many. Do-hyun nodded. He had expected this. He had planned for this. Signal the Dokdo, he said. Tell Commander Oh Hajin it is time. Deep behind the Valkyrie lines, the stealth frigate Dokdo powered up its engines. Commander Oh Hajin was a small woman with cold eyes and steady hands. Her ship had been hiding in the shadow of an asteroid for 3 days, invisible to enemy sensors, waiting for this moment. All ships report ready, her officer said. Hajin smiled. Then let us close the trap. 12 stealth frigates revealed themselves directly behind the Valkyrie fleet. They were small ships, but they carried weapons designed for one purpose: killing engines. Their missiles were smart, guided by an eye that could find the smallest weakness in enemy armor. The Valkyrie fleet had no shields facing backward. Why would they? No one attacked from behind. The frigates fired. The effect was immediate. Valkyrie ships lost power, lost propulsion, lost control. They drifted helplessly as human destroyers closed in. The retreat that Toven ordered became impossible. His fleet was caught between two forces with no way to escape. The battle became a slaughter. Admiral Toven stood on his burning bridge and finally understood. The humans had not just built better weapons. They had learned to think differently. They had studied war while the Valkyrie had grown comfortable. They had hungered for victory while the Valkyrie had assumed it was their birthright. 10,000 years of hatred had created something terrible, something unstoppable. His communications officer managed to open a channel to the homeworld. Toven knew he was going to die, but he could still send a warning. "This is Admiral Toven of the Third Fleet," he said, his voice cracking. "The humans are not what we left. They are not cattle. They are something else. Something worse. They have weapons we cannot match. They have tactics we cannot predict. Do not come here. Do not ever come here. They will destroy you. They will destroy everything." The transmission ended as his ship exploded around him. In the aftermath, the human fleet regrouped around a field of burning debris. Over 2,000 Valkyrie ships had been destroyed. The rest drifted dead or dying. Not a single enemy vessel escaped. On the Guangdeno, Doyun looked at the wreckage and felt no joy. Only a cold satisfaction and a burning question. The Valkyrie Empire had 1,000 worlds. Today, humanity had won a battle, but the war was just beginning. 6 months after the Battle of Seoul, humanity made a decision that surprised no one. They would not wait for the Empire to send another fleet. They would not hide behind their defenses and hope for peace. They would take the war to the Valkyrie. Admiral Kang Sujin stood on the bridge of the carrier Sejong and looked at the stars. Behind her, a fleet of 200 warships waited for her command. They had left Earth 3 weeks ago, following maps recovered from dead Valkyrie vessels. The enemy had been kind enough to show humanity exactly where their worlds were. "First target in range," her navigation officer reported. "The colony world Velther 7. Population approximately 50 million. Sujin nodded. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too much death. She had lost her son in the Battle of Seoul. She had buried friends who had given everything for this moment. She would not waste their sacrifice. "Open a channel," she said. "All frequencies." Her voice broadcast across the alien world below. "This is Admiral Kang Sujin of the United Earth Fleet. Your empire attacked our world. Your people enslaved our ancestors. We have come for justice. You have 1 hour to surrender. If you do not, we will take your world by force." The response came quickly. The Valkyrie governor of the colony was defiant, promising that reinforcements would arrive, that the humans would pay for their crimes against the empire. Sujin waited the full hour. Then she gave the order. The battle was short. The colony's defenses were designed to control slaves, not fight wars. Human ships destroyed them in minutes. Troops landed on the surface and found something unexpected. Sergeant Yun Tai-woo led his squad through the streets of the main city. He was a big man, born in a farming village on Mars, trained for combat since he was 18. He had expected resistance. He had expected enemies. Instead, he found victims. The Valkyrie lived in the center of the city, in tall towers made of glass and metal. But they were few, perhaps 1 million in a population of 50 million. The rest were other species. Creatures with 4 arms. Creatures with scales. creatures with fur and feathers and shapes that human eyes struggled to understand. They wore collars. They lived in shacks. They worked in mines and factories and fields, and when they died, their bodies were thrown away like garbage. They were slaves, just like humanity had been 10,000 years ago. One of them, a creature with 4 arms and blue skin, approached Taiwu's squad. It walked slowly, head bowed, trembling with fear. It spoke in broken Velthari, the only language the slaves were allowed to learn. "Please," it said. "Please not hurt. We work. We serve. Please not hurt." Taiwu lowered his weapon. He looked at this being, this person who had never known freedom, and felt something twist in his chest. "We are not here to hurt you," he said. "We are here to help." The creature looked up, confusion in its eyes. The concept did not translate. No one had ever come to help. Word spread quickly through the colony. The humans were not conquerors. They were something else. They gave food to the hungry. They treated the sick. They removed the collars that the slaves had worn their entire lives. Dr. Han Mireille worked without rest for 3 days. She was a xenobiologist, trained to study alien life, but now she found herself acting as a doctor, a counselor, and a witness. She interviewed hundreds of former slaves, recording their stories. They were all the same. The Velthari had ruled this galaxy for 100,000 years. Every species they encountered was conquered and enslaved. Entire civilizations were erased. Cultures were destroyed. Languages were forbidden. The slaves existed only to serve, and when they were no longer useful, they were discarded. "This is what we could have become," Mireille told Admiral Sujin in her report. "If the Velthari had stayed on Earth, if they had not left us alone, we would have been just like these people, broken, hopeless, forgotten." Sujin read the report and made a decision. She called a meeting of all senior officers. The original mission was clear: destroy Velthari military assets, damage their infrastructure, and force them to sue for peace. But that mission felt small now, incomplete. "We came here for vengeance," Sujin said. "We came to make the Velthari pay for what they did to our ancestors. But look at what we have found. Billions of slaves across hundreds of worlds. People who have suffered just like we did. People who have no one to fight for them." She looked at her officers. "We could ignore them. We could focus only on our own war and leave them to their fate. But is that who we are? Is that what our ancestors suffered for? To become just another empire that takes what it wants and leaves the weak to suffer?" The room was silent. "I say no," Sujin continued. "I say we fight for everyone the Velthari have hurt. Not just for humanity, but for every species they have enslaved. We will not just defeat the empire. We will destroy it. We will free every slave, break every chain, and burn their rotten system to the ground." The officers voted. The decision was unanimous. The long march had begun. Over the next 2 years, the human fleet moved from world to world. They destroyed Velthari defenses. They freed slave populations. They taught the freed peoples how to fight back. On the fortress moon of Kelith IV, Sergeant Taiwu found himself training an army. The Norvani, the 4-armed blue-skinned people he had first met, wanted to join the war. They had never held weapons before. They did not know tactics or strategy, but they knew hatred. They knew the burn of chains. They knew what they wanted to do to their masters. "You are terrible soldiers," Taiwu told them honestly. "You hold your weapons wrong. You cannot aim. You panic under fire." The Norvani leader, an elder named Korin, lowered his head in shame. "But," Taiwu continued, "you are the bravest people I have ever met. You have no training, no experience, no hope of survival, and still you want to fight. That is worth more than any skill I can teach you." He showed them how to use human weapons. He taught them to work in teams. He watched them fall and get up again and again, driven by a fire that he recognized in his own heart. "Why do you help us?" Corin asked one night, as they sat around the fire on the moon's cold surface. "You could have taken your revenge on the Velthari and left. We are nothing to you." Taiwu thought about the stories his mother had told him, about the chains his ancestors had worn, about the 10,000 years of preparation. "Because someone should have helped us," he said. 10,000 years ago, my people were just like you, slaves, animals, nothing. No one came to save us. We had to save ourselves. And we spent 10,000 years asking one question. Why? Why did no one help? Why did the galaxy let us suffer? He looked at Corin. I do not have an answer to that question. But I know this, we are here now. We can help now. And if we do not, then what was the point of surviving? What was the point of getting stronger? Just so we could become another bully? Another master? No, we are better than that. We have to be better than that. Corin was quiet for a long time. Then we will fight together, he said finally. And we will win together. And when this is over, we will build something new. Something better. Taiwu nodded. Yes, he said. That is exactly what we will do. Across the galaxy, the word spread. The humans were coming. They were not conquerors. They were liberators. And they were not going to stop until every slave was free and every chain was broken. The Velthari Empire, for the first time in 100,000 years, felt fear. 3 years after the Battle of Seoul, the human fleet reached the Velthari throne world. The planet was called Velthar Prime, and it was beautiful in a terrible way. Great cities covered its surface, built from stone and metal and the labor of 1 billion slaves over 100,000 years. At its heart stood the Imperial Palace, a tower so tall it pierced the clouds, home to the creature who had ruled this galaxy since before humanity learned to make fire, Emperor Vothran the Eternal. He was old. So old that no one remembered when he had been born. He had watched civilizations rise and fall. He had ordered the conquest of 1,000 worlds. He had sat on his throne while generations of slaves lived and died in his service, never questioning, never doubting that this was the natural order of things. Now he watched from his throne room as his empire burned. The screens showed rebellion on 100 worlds. Slave armies, trained by humans, fought against Velthari garrisons. Ships with human crews and mixed crews and crews of freed slaves hunted down the remains of the Imperial fleet. The supply lines that had fed the Empire for millennia were cut. The factories that had built its weapons were silent. And now the humans were here, at the heart of everything. With a fleet that outnumbered his remaining defenders 3-1. Ambassador Choi Suni requested a meeting. Vothran agreed. Not because he hoped for peace, but because he wanted to see these creatures with his own eyes. He wanted to understand how everything had gone so wrong. The meeting took place in the Imperial throne room. Vothran sat on a throne of gold and bone, surrounded by the last of his guards. He wore ceremonial armor that had not seen battle in 10,000 years. He looked like a god, ancient and terrible. Suni entered alone, but she was not alone. Behind her, visible through the great windows, stood representatives of every species the Velthari had ever enslaved. Narvani and Keleth and dozens of others, all wearing the uniform of the Liberation Coalition, all carrying weapons, all staring at the Emperor with eyes full of cold rage. So, Vothran said, the cattle have learned to walk on 2 legs. Suni stopped before the throne. She was older now, her hair fully gray, her face marked by 3 years of war. But her eyes were clear and her voice was steady. Your empire is finished, she said. Your fleets are destroyed. Your worlds have risen against you. You have nothing left but this palace and your pride." Vothran laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound. "Do you expect me to beg? To surrender? I have ruled this galaxy for 6,000 years. I have watched species like yours crawl out of the mud and then crawl back in. You are a moment, a spark. You will fade, and the Empire will return." "No," Suni said. "It will not. Your empire was built on slavery and cruelty. It stood because no one was strong enough to tear it down. We are strong enough. We have torn it down, and we will make sure it never rises again." She pulled out a document and held it before the Emperor. "These are our terms. Unconditional surrender. Dissolution of the Empire. War crimes tribunals for every Velthari official who participated in the slave system. Reparations to every species you have wronged." Vothran read the terms, and his face twisted with disgust. "You would have us become slaves? You would reverse the natural order." "There is no natural order," Suni said. "There is only power and choice. You had power, and you chose cruelty. Now we have power, and we choose justice." Vothran stood from his throne. Despite his age, he was still tall, still imposing. His guards raised their weapons. "Then you will have neither justice nor mercy," he said. "I would rather destroy everything than see it fall into your hands." He reached for a device on his throne. Suni had expected this. Intelligence reports had warned of a planet-killer weapon, a last resort designed to ensure mutual destruction. Vothran pressed the activation button. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. Still nothing. His face went pale. "Looking for this?" A voice said. A young woman stepped out from behind a pillar. She was short, with messy hair and a technician's uniform. Her name was Li Jiwan, and she was a corporal from Bizan who had spent the last 6 months inside the Imperial Computer Network. "Your weapon codes were changed last week," Jiwan said cheerfully. "Also, your entire defense grid is offline, and your emergency escape ships have been disabled. And I may have replaced your planet killer activation sequence with a really nice song about freedom. It is playing on loop in every Velthari military installation right now." Vothran stared at her with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "How?" he whispered. "Our systems are perfect. No one can breach them." Jiwan shrugged. "Your systems were perfect 10,000 years ago. You never updated them. We spent 10,000 years getting better at everything, including hacking." The guards moved toward Jiwan, but soldiers from the Liberation Coalition flooded into the throne room. Norvani warriors, Kelith fighters, human marines, all pointing weapons at the last of the Imperial Guard. Sergeant Yun Tai Wu was among them. He walked up to the Emperor's throne and looked at the ancient creature who had caused so much suffering. "On behalf of every slave who ever died in your mines," Tai Wu said. "On behalf of every child who was taken from their parents. On behalf of every person who lived and died without ever knowing freedom. I am placing you under arrest." Vothran was taken into custody. His guards surrendered. The war was over. 50 years later, the galaxy was a different place. The Velthari Empire was gone, replaced by the Galactic Liberation Council. Hundreds of species worked together, each one charting its own course, each one free. The old slave worlds had become independent nations. The chains were museums now, displayed so that no one would ever forget what had happened and what had been overcome. President No Yejin addressed the council on the anniversary of the day humans first arrived at Velthar Prime. She was young for a president, barely 50, but she carried herself with a gravity that came from knowing her history. Her grandmother had fought in the Battle of Seoul. Her great-grandfather had been one of the first humans to set foot on a liberated world. 50 years ago, she said, we came to this galaxy as Avengers. We carried 10,000 years of anger in our hearts. We wanted to make the Veltri suffer as they had made us suffer. She paused, looking out at the assembled representatives. Narvani and Keleth and Veltri too, the children of the oppressors, born into a world where their ancestors' crimes were taught in every school. We could have become them, Yijin continued. We had every reason to. Pain creates pain. Cruelty breeds cruelty. It would have been so easy to take our revenge and call it justice. To enslave the Veltri as they had enslaved us. To become the new masters of the galaxy. She shook her head. But we chose differently. We chose to remember not just our suffering, but our purpose. We did not survive for 10,000 years just to become another empire of cruelty. We survived to build something better, to prove that the cycle could be broken. She straightened her shoulders. They thought they were gods, and we were cattle. They thought the strong must always crush the weak. They thought this was the natural order, written into the stars themselves. They were wrong. Her voice rose, filling the great chamber. We are not gods. We are not masters. We are simply people who refused to accept that suffering was inevitable. People who looked at the chains on our wrists and said no. People who climbed out of the darkness, not to stand above others, but to help others climb too. She looked at the camera that would broadcast her words to 100 worlds. We are human. We bow to no one. But more importantly, we ask no one to bow to us. That is what makes us different. That is what makes us strong. Not our weapons, not our technology, but our choice. Our decision to be better than what was done to us. She smiled. And that is why, 50 years ago, when we had the power to do anything we wanted, we chose freedom. For everyone. Forever. The chamber erupted in applause. Representatives of 100 species rose to their feet, cheering, celebrating, remembering Dot in the crowd. An old Norvani named Korin wiped tears from his eyes. Beside him stood Sergeant Taiwu, now retired, white-haired and bent with age but still standing straight. We did it, Korin said. We actually did it. Taiwu nodded. He thought about all the people who had died to make this moment possible. His friends from the Battle of Seoul, the slaves who had risen up knowing they would not survive. The humans and aliens who had fought side by side across 100 worlds. Yes, he said. We did. But the real work is just beginning. Freedom is not something you win once. It is something you have to protect every day. Korin looked at him. Then we will protect it, he said. Together. Taiwu smiled. Yes, he said. Together. Above them, through the great windows of the council chamber, the stars shone bright. Once they had been the domain of tyrants. Now they belonged to everyone. And humanity, the species that had once been cattle, watched over them all. Not as masters, but as guardians. Forever.